Costs and city revenues. Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Report. I'm your host, Chris Berg. I was talking to a general contractor earlier this week, and he shared with me, Chris, a lot of people have been anticipating that construction costs are going to go down. He goes, I got to tell you, we're just not seeing it. And we've talked about it here before on the show as to why that's not happening. I'm going to play for you some really interesting clips from Barry Sternlicht. He is the founder and CEO of Starwood Capital. We all know Starwood Resort, so he had some very fascinating things to say. Want to remind you, we've talked about it here before, that when I was at Las Vegas for a self-storage event, former Federal Reserve president of the Dallas Federal Reserve, Robert Kaplan, was there. And he reminded all of us, look, guys, the reason the recession hasn't hit like everyone's been predicting here in 2023 is because there's still $750 billion with a B, $750 billion in the system of COVID money. He goes, here's the kicker. That money just has to be appropriated by the end of 2024 and then spent by the end of 2025. Also, you've got $1 trillion from the infrastructure fund. Thus, you've got a lot of public money that's going into bridges, roads, all this kind of infrastructure that is keeping construction people employed. Thus, there's no reason, obviously, to depress the wages. So here's Barry Sternlicht. I want to have you hear his point of view on this conversation as well.
Points, real interest rates. And here's where it gets really tricky, because the economy is too strong. It's too strong because of public spending. It's not too strong because of private spending. Private spending is rolling over. You saw UPS's numbers this morning. You've seen, in the last 2 weeks, you've probably seen 200,000 job layoff announcements.
Just today, we saw Zoom lay off another 150 or 2% of its workforce as well. So those are areas in private businesses. Obviously, you're beginning to see the layoffs, but all this public spending is going to keep the construction workers working.
Macy's, Amazon, everyone's laying workers off. The federal government's hiring them. So all construction should lose 1 million jobs. We raise interest rates 500%. We have a piece of land in Fort Lauderdale. We're going to warehouse it. We're not going to build it. The numbers don't make sense. Across the country, construction is plummeting. Industrial construction is down 70%. When we get through this wave of multis, which we're finishing, you'll probably have down 70% in multifamily construction. You would see 1 million construction workers unemployed, like you did in 07, 08. You've seen none. Why? Bridges, roads, and tunnels. The New Hampshire election, talking about, oh, we're building all these roads and bridges and tunnels. This is the infrastructure bill. It's $1 trillion bill. They're spending enough money to keep these guys employed. So you're not getting, so the Fed keeps using this really blunt, horrible instrument, 5.5% interest rates with two huge victims themselves, because we have a $34 trillion deficit, and it's going to run, the debt is going to roll over. A third of our debt rolls over this year. He can pay 5.3% on it, or he can pay 3% if he lowers rates. That's $200 billion. That's a quarter of the defense budget, which is the largest component of our budget. So he has a.
So you've got to think about those kind of numbers sitting in the system with all the infrastructure money that's still there. And that's, again, why I would encourage you to, we all hear, hey, survive till 25 in commercial real estate. There's $2.2 trillion in loans coming due by 2028. We'll see how this thesis plays out. But the thesis that I'm looking at from a real estate cycle perspective is, I think 24 is going to be fine. If President Trump somehow becomes elected, 25 is going to be good. I would keep your eye on that second quarter, third quarter of 2026 and beyond, where some of these things are going to begin to crumble. So I want to play another clip here, because speaking of that, one of the things that we've talked about before here on the Commercial Real Estate Report, and I want to get to the right timeline for you for Barry's comments on it, is when you look at cities like San Francisco, I mean, there are really good office properties. There's hotels where literally you've got the owners now just going to the banks going, look, take the keys. I don't know what we're going to do with it. We can't make things work in the city because it is such a hot mess right now. So when you start to think of it from that perspective, and these guys are giving the keys back, what's San Francisco going to do? Like, how are they going to meet their revenue goals with as a city if there's no office tenants, if there's no one's coming into the city for hotels to stay there or for conventions? You got to start to think about those now. Again, they can obviously raise the mill, and Barry's going to comment on this in a moment. They can raise the mills, but all that's going to do then is devalue the actual property that they're trying to extract all the revenue from. So it is going to be fascinating to see what some of these cities are going to be doing, because they're just simply not going to be able to squeeze the revenue out of a stone.
So the government
Can we talk about that?
playing,
They survived to 25.
Well, so the brutality of what's going to happen to New York City and San Francisco and Los Angeles is that they rely on the property taxes of the commercial buildings to run their cities. Like that's how they pay for the police and the firemen and the educators and the trash removal. So when the receipts plummet, you get into this. And now what do? They'll increase the mill rate. So if I'm paying $1 million today, but my hotel's worth, not my hotel, let's not pick on hotels. My office building's worth a third of what it was. And we say we need relief. Normally we'd get that. Now they'll say, it's $1 million, your mill rate just tripled. Because they can't lay off, which means the building even goes down further in value and it is abandoned. So right now, the office markets are funny because you want to give your building back to the lender and they don't want it. They won't take it. Like, you take it. No, I don't want it. You take it.
Nobody wants to hold the assets.
Because it's capital intensive. And there's, we look at every building now that we own and we say, should we put the money in for the tenant improvements? And the tenants are smart. They're like, if you want me in that building, I want $200 a foot to fix out my space. Well, the building's only worth $400 a foot, so maybe I got to buy the building for $200 a foot. It's going to be fascinating. And people will make a lot of money in the office markets because they're not going to be empty.
But
they're
some
just
of
going
those
to have
cities,
a lower vacancy.
17% of Chicago is coming due. How do these cities survive this? You're talking about like what happens to these B and C class buildings? They become like
they're going to rely on the government. Federal government will come in with some credits to help people convert or tear down buildings and turn them into residential, which we desperately need. And the cities are going to have a problem. The big blue cities that are not working. They're not working for. I mean, I don't know anyone. I haven't met anybody who thinks what's happening in San Francisco is good. But it's not good. And then retailers leave and these cities become ghost towns and we'll go through the Detroit cycle. And maybe there'll be a guy like Bedford Properties, I forgot his name now, who came in and bought all of Detroit. He owns 85 buildings downtown, Bedrock. He bought the Cleveland Cavaliers. What's his name?
But you got to ask yourself, what is San Francisco going to do? One thing I'll share with you is I recently had Matt Moran on my podcast, the Commercial Real Estate Report. And I asked him, I said, look, if you were going to go out there and raise some money right now, I'm going to bring this up to share with you, where would you be deploying capital? And I think his answer may surprise some of us, but here's what he had to say.
I don't think that the dips are going to be as great as they were, say, in the early 90s or even the 2000 kind of dip. There's just too much capital out there and it's going to step in sooner. So, again, if I was young, if I was 25 years old, I'd be all over the office space. I think that's a good place. I think there's going to be some great buys in apartments, multifamily.
So he said, hey, if you're young and you want to go and hustle and get some money, go get into the office space. So love to know your point of view there as far as, hey, what are we going to do with some of these cities that are just simply not going to have the revenues in the future? If things continue to go in the direction they're going, then of course, construction costs, such a paramount part when it comes to going out there and developing your commercial real estate, especially obviously as a developer. And if construction costs are going to stay elevated due to all the federal and local and government spending, what does that look like for you as a developer? Thanks for joining us here on the Commercial Real Estate Report. I'm Chris Berg. See you back here soon.